Hello, welcome back to Lady Love Said Reads. My name is Jessica and this is my February 2024 wrap-up. We can start by looking at some quick stats. I read 16 books in February, which is a pretty intense reading month. For genre, I had 4 fantasy, 2 romance, 3 thriller, 2 mystery, 3 nonfiction, 4 lit fic, 5 horror, 1 contemporary, 2 manga, and 2 works in translation. 4 of the books came from my own shelf. So I started out the month of February with 346 books on my physical shelf unread and 208 read, for basically a percentage of unread at about 40%. I ended the month, my birthday's in February, so I ended up hauling quite a few books. So at the end of the month, even having read those 4 books from my shelf, by the end of the month I had 351 unread books on my shelf and I had read 220. So the percentage actually went from 40 down to 39%. And my goal is to get to 50% by the end of the year. So that's no bueno. That's okay. It's not that serious. My favorite book of the month was Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. Let's just get into what I read. When I do my monthly wrap-ups, I like to play the game MASH. MASH is a numbers game we played in the 90s when I was a kid. It predicts your future. So you can predict things like where you live, what your job will be, who you marry, that kind of thing. I use 4 criteria for MASH. I look at house, and for house I decide which setting I would want to be in from the books. I look at romantic partner, who would I want to be in a relationship with the books. I look at family, what family or friend group would I want to be in, and then I look at job. So from the book, what job would I want to have? So I draw 4 books. I had 16 books, so we'll be able to do 4 complete rounds. I draw from my apothecary jar, which is from Owl Crate. The Rachel Incident by Carolyn O'Donoghue. Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. This Dark Descent by Kaylin Josephson. And Happy Place by Emily Henry. Let's start with This Dark Descent by Kaylin Josephson. This is a young adult fantasy. It's high fantasy, and this is about so the main character is Makira Russell, and her family is famous for breeding enchanted racehorses, but her father was arrested for practicing unregistered magic, and in order to get him released, she makes a deal with one of the royal families that she'll ride in this really intense race called the Elenier, and if she wins the race, her father gets to come back to her charges dropped. If she loses the race, this royal will get her farm and take over her breeding program. She decides to enter into a partnership with a competing royal named Damien, and Damien has some ulterior motives of his own for getting Makira to win this race. There is a 3rd and 4th character. So there's Damien Adair, there is Ari, and then Ari is like a sorceress, but she's practicing magic unregistered. So she gets hired by Damien to work with them on winning this race. Reed is Damien's best friend. He's also like a horse trainer and all of that. So that's the basic setup of this story. Now, all of that sounds extremely Jessica coded. And I loved this book in theory. When I think about the story and I think about the characters and I think about the plot, that all makes me really, really happy. But this was not well written. This had some really sloppy writing errors, some really easy to spot continuity errors that made things confusing. And I don't honestly blame the author for this. I blame the editor for that. This read like an arc. It didn't read like a completed work. And I really think it was just stuff that got missed in editing. Like, who read this before they put it out? Looked like nobody. So yes, I do blame the editors for that and not the writer. I am considering reading the second book. I think this is a duology. I'm considering reading the second book. Like, should I suddenly get in a strong mood to read it? I probably will, but it's not a high priority. And I gave this 3 stars. For MASH, I picked out setting because this is a really cool setting and a really cool world. And like, hello, enchanted horses? Sign me the freak up. The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is contemporary literary fiction. It's kind of in that category of women versus the void, that subgenre of lit fic that I really like. And it's about Rachel, who has an affair or attempts to have an affair with her professor, and it doesn't go as planned. What happens gets dubbed the Rachel Incident in this like small Irish town, and it just kind of follows her around. Like, her reputation is really damaged by it. This weird little trio that they end up having going on gets a little bit toxic. And it really deals with themes of like women's rights, abortion rights, like a sexual awakening in your early 20s. It deals with like coming out of the closet as LGBT and when you do that and how you do that and what struggles there are involved with that. It deals with friendship and enmeshment in friendship. And I really liked this. I thought it was very well done. And I think I'll definitely read more from this writer. For MASH, I picked Hijab because one of the characters in this is a book editor. So I would do that job. Oh, it's set in Ireland in the 90s. I don't know if I mentioned that. Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. This is an adult horror. I adored this book. I just adored this book. It's so... like, it's a horror, but it's so sweet. It's so sweet. So this is about a couple and their young son dies. And the mother saves a piece of his lung. And the lung comes back to life. But it comes back to life as like this flesh-eating monster. And so they're now sort of trying to raise this monster. And there's several different perspectives. It goes through different character shifts. So you get the mother's perspective, you get the auntie's perspective, you get the dad's perspective. And each perspective covers a different stage of growth for Monstrilio. It's basically a coming of age novel or a Bildungsroman for this little monster. And you just fall in love with them. You just fall in love with them. And, you know, the major themes in this are things like parenting and making the best decisions for your children, loving your children as they are rather than trying to shape and change them into something that they're not. It's about coming of age and how when we finally come into ourselves, how we tend to strip away some of the layers and expectations that society and our families place on us to figure out who we really are and what our true purpose in life is. So I just loved it. I mean, it's a short little book and I gave it 4 stars. For MASH, I picked Romantic Partner. I was in love with the auntie in this. Monstrilio's auntie. She's a doctor. She's just the kindest person, the most compassionate person, so loving, so loyal. Like, I did fall a little bit in love with her when I was reading this. And then Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is an adult contemporary romance, and it is a second chance romance. That's all I can tell you about it because I DNF'd it really early on. It just didn't feel that interesting to me. I don't really like second chance romance stories. I loved Emily Henry's first, well, it was my first read of hers, Beach Read. I read Beach Read, I think, in January. and I really liked it and I was really impressed by her. So I wanted to read another one of her books, and I did, you know, I went into it knowing I don't love second chance romance, but I wanted to give it a try anyway. And the premise of it really wasn't all that engaging or interesting. The characters didn't really gauge my interest either, and so I ended up DNFing it. But for MASH, I picked friend group or family group because they do seem like a really close-knit group of friends. Basically, it's a group of friends that go on vacation to their happy place. That's all I can tell you about it. Time for the next round. Hijab Butch Blues by Lamia H. Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. The Promised Neverland Volume 18 by Caillou Shirai and Posuka Demizu. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. That was really easy for me to sort out here. Let's start with The Promised Neverland number 18 by Caillou Shirai and Posuka Demizu. This is getting to be close to the end of this series. So this is about an orphanage that turns out to not be what the kids think it is, and the kids escape the orphanage and then they end up in like this dystopian hellscape fighting for their life, trying to change the world. And it's so good. It's so good. I gave this volume 5 stars. It is my favorite volume of the entire series. Everything that I love about this series is in this book. The friendships, the depth and warmth of these characters, the intriguing plot that feels like a game of chess, the action, the adventure, the larger themes of like how one person can change the whole world, especially if they have the right support and the right people around them. It just was phenomenal. It blew me away, and I gave it 5 stars. For MASH, I picked friend group. Anytime I pull The Promised Neverland in my MASH game, I always end up picking friend group because it's just such an incredible group of friends. The way they love each other, the way they care for each other, the way they fight for each other. It's what I hope all of us can have, you know? Like, it's a true family in every sense of the word. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is an adult contemporary literary fiction. I think it might be considered a modern classic at this point. Also considered dark academia. It is about a group of college students who end up murdering one of their friends. And the book basically is a very slow burn build up to the event and fallout after. And this was a 5-star read for me, but it's an uncomfortable 5 stars because there are some weird racist elements in this. Like, there's a moment in here where they're talking about people from an Arabic background, and like they're at this bar and the people at the bar are just spewing all of this horrible racist stuff about people from an Arabic background. But then there's no like discussion after about how messed up that was or how wrong that was or how misguided that character was. Like, it's just there and then they move on. And then there's a couple other moments like that too with black populations, like just really weird offhand remarks that don't really get addressed. Like, they don't really get addressed. And it isn't clear in here like where Donna Tartt really stands on some of that stuff. And I don't know, it just made me uncomfortable. Like, it made me uncomfortable. So if you're gonna go into this book, please go into it knowing that there's some fairly triggering racism that happens in this. For me, the overall story, the writing is so lush. It's so lush. Her prose is so beautiful. The slow burn, it makes you get to know these characters at such a deep level. You get to know what's going on in their head, you get to know their past, you understand their motives and why all these things happen and why things fall out the way they do. You get to watch them unravel. And all of that for me was 5 stars, but like I said, an uncomfortable 5 stars. For MASH, I would pick Romantic Partner. And again, this is very uncomfortable because he's not a great person, but I was a little bit in love with Henry. up until he made a few really like messed up comments. But then he kind of redeems himself in the end too, if you read this. Like, yeah, it's an uncomfortable choice here, but of the options, yeah, that's that. I'm gonna move on now. Hijab Butch Blues by Lamia H. This is an adult memoir. It's nonfiction, and it's basically this coming of age memoir where the writer is learning about themselves and their sexuality and their gender identity within the context of Islam. So this person is a practicing Muslim, and not someone who feels like, I think the stereotype, the thing we all want to believe about Islam is that people who are women or transgender or LGBTQIA renounce Islam when they come out, and they, you know, at least that's an assumption that I find my brain like auto falling into, and then I have to check myself and be like, no, that's not the case. Like, this writer is a practicing Muslim, and they love God and they love their religion, and they use the Quran throughout this work to contextualize their writing and to contextualize their experience. And I thought that was really brilliant, and I really liked learning about Islam because I really don't know that much about it. I've never read the Quran, and so I like being able to read some of those passages from the Quran. I was surprised at how similar it is to certain parts of the Bible and certain stories, how they overlap. And I've always known it's like a peaceful religion, right? It's a peaceful, loving religion. I have to give this writer credit for being a voice that doesn't shirk their religion, but someone who incorporates their religion into part of their identity. They don't find their religion to be constrictive or suffocating or anything like that. It's just part of who they are, and they sort of integrate all these parts of themselves. And kind of, this book kind of shows how they work to integrate their identity as a queer person, their identity as a trans person, their identity as a Muslim into someone who is like a whole and complete person. And how all those things can exist and work together. I gave it 4 stars. For MASH, what did I pick for MASH? Oh, for MASH I picked setting. The writer didn't say what country they were in. They just kept saying they were in a country that practiced primarily Islam, like an Islamic country. So I don't know for sure where this writer is from, but they do travel a bit. They end up in New York, they end up, so I think being in the setting of this story and going on that journey with them would be a really interesting experience, you know, from their home country to New York to all these different places that they go. The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is a YA mystery thriller. I think most people have heard of this, but this main character, and I can't remember the character's names right now, but she is a female main character protagonist, a young teenage girl. She gets notified that she has inherited this billionaire's estate. And when she gets to the estate, it turns out that she's required to live there for a year in order to inherit things. But as she stays there, she works with the actual family of this person called the Hawthorns. So it's the Hawthorne brothers. She works with the Hawthorne brothers to solve these different riddles, kind of like a scavenger hunt that this billionaire has left behind for them, to try to figure out, like, why is she inheriting this money, and what does she need to do to get the money, what should she do with the money when she gets it, and all of that. I thought it was a really great start to this series. It was highly entertaining. It reads similarly to like a Karen and McManus, if you've read any of her YA thrillers or mysteries, and I'll definitely continue with the next book in the series. For MASH, I picked Job because she has a publicist that works with her and does everything that I love about PR and publicity. So that's what I do for that job. Next round. Ripe by Sarah Rose Eder. The Promised Neverland Volume 19 by Caillou Shirai and Postuka Demizu. Coming Home to Puddleduck Farm by Della Galton, and The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. Coming Home to Puddleduck Farm by Della Galton. This is the first book in a series. It's an adult contemporary cozy. And it's about this, again, I can't remember the character's name, but she goes through a bad breakup. So she moves back home to her family farm called Puddleduck Farm. And she basically is helping her grandmother raise money to keep the farm going and to potentially turn it into a nonprofit to help animals. And I listened to this during a weekend when I was covering chores out at the barn, and I was very stressed out that weekend. Anxiety was super high, not doing well. So I wanted something that I could just escape into and listen to while I was doing chores, so I didn't have to think about anything else. I could just live in this like cozy little world. And it did exactly what I needed it to do for me and my brain in that moment. It was super cozy. It just helped me relax. It helped me stay centered so I could get through that really stressful particular week and weekend. And it was nice to listen to, reading about like this cozy little farm while I'm doing farm chores. And I was at the barn for like 12 hours that day, so I listened to it all in one day. And I will continue it and read the next one for sure. Probably the next time I have to cover chores again. So for MASH, I picked setting because it's such a cozy, lovely provincial setting. It's set in like a farmland area in England. So yeah, it just, if you need a cozy read that will just make you feel safe and warm, that you can just escape into, definitely check it out. My friend Cajun recommended it to me. She has the best recommendations for cozy reads like that. So I will read the next one. Yeah, the next time that I need it. The Promised Neverland Volume 19 by Kayu Shirai and Potsuka Demizu. Again, I'm going to pick Friend Group for this, but Volume 19 basically is setting up the last volume, which is Volume 20. It's the second to last one. It's setting it up, basically is transitioning from some of the big major action scenes in Volume 18, moving into the final wrap-up volume in Volume 20. I know Volume 20 is going to be just gut-wrenching simply because it's been such a journey reading this series, and it's the last one, and I know it's just gonna get me in my feels. But Volume 19, it was good. It was a solid like transition volume, and I gave it 4 stars. And you know, I picked Friend Group again because anytime I draw a Neverland, I'm gonna pick Friend Group. The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. This is an adult nonfiction memoir, and it's specifically about Carrie Fisher's experience in producing and starring in Star Wars. I don't know if she produced it, but she starred in Star Wars as Princess Leia, and that whole experience, how huge the movies were and how it basically followed her around the rest of her life, and her relationship with the people on set. So specifically Harrison Ford, but a little bit about some of the others like Mark Hamill. So it's fairly short, and that's basically the gist of it. Is, you know, and she does have a section in here where she's printing diaries that she wrote during filming. So that's where the title comes in, The Princess Diarist. I felt like this could have been a little better organized. Like, she leads up and talks about it, then she inserts her diaries, and then she wraps up, you know, talking about some other stuff. I felt like it could have been better organized if she had interspersed those diary entries with her own current storytelling of the event. So I didn't think it was the best organized. I am not a Star Wars girl, so I really didn't find that all that interesting. And a lot of what she goes through are things that every woman who writes a memoir writes about, right? Unrequited love and toxic relationships and that kind of thing. So it wasn't a favorite of mine, but I think if you like Star Wars, you probably would really like it. I gave it 3 stars, and for MASH, I picked Romantic Partner because I had a huge crush on Mark Hamill. Honestly, I think Harry Styles looks like a young Mark Hamill. Pictures, do you agree? Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. This was my favorite book of the month. I gave it 5 stars. This is contemporary literary fiction, more of that woman versus the void, unhinged women subgenre. And it is about Burnout. Cassie is the main character. She works in Silicon Valley, and it's about just how capitalism will bleed you to death if you let it. Her job wants all of her time dedicated to her job. Her job is requiring her to do things that she thinks are kind of unethical in order to compete with the competitors. Her job is just sucking the life out of her. And the burnout and depression that comes along with that is personified in this as this dark cloud that follows her around. Like this dark shadow that just follows her, that's like right up here and follows her around. And it gets bigger or smaller depending on how burnt out and depressed she is throughout the book. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. It's a good example of right book, right time, because I was really feeling the burnout when I read it, and I just felt like it explains burnout in such a wonderful, accurate way. Like, it really does feel like this. It really does. And I just thought this was such a fantastic book. And I gave it 5 stars. Now, the only thing I was left with for MASH was job, and I do not want to be working in Silicon Valley, especially the job that she had where she was so stressed out. But I think one of her friends, or maybe it's her dad, someone in here is a librarian, or I'm misremembering things, or maybe her dad is a bookseller. Her dad does something where it's like he's got kind of an easy life, doesn't get paid a lot, but got like an easy, peaceful life. So I think if I had to pick job, that's what I pick. And the last 4. I've been filming for 30 minutes. My wrap-ups always take a long time, I feel like. Winterkill by CJ Box. Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Which one am I missing here? Oh, The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. Okay, let's start with Winterkill by CJ Box. This is book 3 in the Joe Pickett series, which is like a Western flavored mystery thriller. And the main character, Joe, is a game warden out in like the West. I can never remember if it's the Dakotas or Montana or somewhere else, but in this one, we're dealing with insurrectionists. And this is a group of people that's been living in a nomadic way. They settle in Joe's town, and he goes to investigate and see what's up, because all of these like FBI and federal agents have suddenly descended on the town, and they're like, hey, this group of people is bad news. We need to take them down. And Joe's like, well, hang on, let's like investigate it. So it turns out that this is a group of people that survived things like Ruby Ridge and other groups. It's like the children of people at Ruby Ridge and similar events. And they don't want anything to do with that life anymore. Like, they're just trying to heal and move on with their lives. So now Joe's in like this pickle between like the pressure he's getting from the federal agents and what he's learned about this group of nomads. So that's like the basis of it. There's a lot more drama that's involved in the story, and this one is pretty tragic. Like, it's pretty darn tragic. Joe and his family really go through some rough stuff in this. So I'm interested to see what the fallout of that will be in book 4. I did give this 4 stars. I thought it was really well done. And for MASH, I picked Romantic Partner. I'm crushing on Joe, I'm not gonna lie. Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. This is an adult nonfiction self-help, and the theme of this book, or the intention of this book, is to explain how to break the stress cycle that happens when you experience burnout. I give this book 2 stars, I think. 2 or maybe even 1 star, but I didn't like it. It was super disappointing. About 10% of this book actually talks about what the title says it's about, which is burnout and the stress cycle. The rest of it talks about social justice issues. Now, I know that social justice issues are a big part of burnout, right? We have to learn how to navigate things like racism, sexism, capitalism, because those things absolutely contribute to burnout. But I feel like the percentage should have been flipped. Like 10% of that could have been social justice issues, and the other 90% could have been focused on things that we can actually do to manage burnout in our lives. So it was a very disappointing read. But for MASH, I picked Friend Group because I would love to have a group of friends who is dedicated to mental wellness and not burning out. We'll go with that. The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is an adult thriller, and it's basically like a haunted hotel. It's set in the 80s and 90s, and this woman goes missing, and then in the early 2000s, her niece takes a job at the hotel to try to figure out what happened to her, basically walking in her aunt's footsteps. Her aunt had worked at this hotel when she went missing. The hotel, like I said, it's haunted, so there's that like spooky paranormal element. It felt a lot like Schitt's Creek, only make it horror, and I really liked it. I thought it was a great time. I was on the edge of my seat, and I thought the characters were well developed. The plot was nice and action-packed and intense and twisty and turny. The mystery was good. I liked how it really addressed how women really have to work hard to feel safe in the world, and the things that we have to do to feel safe, and how wrong it is that we can't even walk down the street at night without feeling safe. So I give that 4 stars. For MASH, I picked Job because I'd want to work in a haunted hotel. That would be so fun. And then last is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is book 1 in a duology. I think it's called the Enchanted Letters duology. It is an adult high fantasy romance, and it is about this woman who has an enchanted typewriter. And when she writes a letter on this typewriter, the letter goes to the person who owns the other enchanted typewriter. Iris and Roman are the main characters here. They work for a newspaper covering what's going on in this war that's happening between gods. One thing I think this book could have done better is a little bit more world building. I felt like there was a lot of opportunity here to create a really interesting world. It was never fully like fleshed out why these gods are at war with each other or why it's really happening. The main focus was on the romance between Iris and Roman, and it was a very sweet romance. I thought it was compelling in that it felt believable. The build up to their romance felt believable. The attraction felt believable. The reasons for why they liked one another felt believable. It wasn't just for no reason. It wasn't insta love or any of those other things. It was a very genuine and sweet relationship depicted in this story. So I'll definitely read the second one. I did give this 4 stars. For MASH, oh, I picked Setting. I couldn't remember for a second. Did I pick Setting? Or was that Puddleduck? Okay, yeah, I think it was Setting. Forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I thought this would be a really cool setting to be a part of. One thing that really got me was the way that this writer writes about war. You really feel like the tension and the fear of like what's going to happen next in this war. How's it going to affect me? Is my town going to get attacked? So she does that war tension super well. So that wouldn't be something I'd want to experience in the setting, but I felt like it was a fairly cool setting. It felt sort of 1920s, felt sort of Peaky Blinders. It felt, yeah, kind of like that. Okay, that is what I read in February. Have you read any of these books? Let me know down below if you have and what you thought of them. No spoilers for folks who haven't read them yet. What was your favorite book of February? I'd also love to know that. If you just want to let me know that you're here, go ahead and leave me any fruit emoji for ripe. And until next time, make sure that you continue to read good books, drink good coffee, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye!